today I want to talk about this book, Whether Violent or Natural by Natasha Calder, which is a debut novel that I picked up from my library kind of completely by chance because I saw it, I think, either on the highlights shelf or the recently returned. So it was definitely a roulette pick for me, and I judged it based literally on its blurb and the beautiful cover. So when I added it on Goodreads, I saw it only has about 150 ratings, and there is a good mix percentage wise amongst the ratings. So I thought that that's a good opportunity to read something new, and it happens to be a dystopian novel. And dystopian books in 2014 were my culture, so I had to get into this. Let me start with the blurb. So, years after complete antibiotic resistance has resulted in the loss of most human life on Earth, Kit and Creven eke out an existence on a remote island. Under a collapsing castle, they spend their days in an underground bunker packed with emergency stores, venturing out only at night. They are safe. One evening, a woman washes ashore, nearly drowned. Creven wants to keep her alive, but Kit isn't so sure. The new arrival will implode Kit and Creven's world with dire and fatal consequences, churning up the waters of the past and unearthing secrets they have kept from each other and from themselves. Who is really in control, and what are they both capable of doing to protect their haven? The part that really caught my attention was the very first part about antibiotic resistance, because it's plausible for this kind of thing to happen in the real world. So there's a lot of possibilities of what the author can do with it, and I was really curious to see how this world kind of worked. So what I'm going to do here is try to go on the journey of the book, and I'll go through writing, plot, characters, and then overall. So I will be spoiling the twist at the end, but yeah, I'll go through everything. So for the entirety of the book, we are in the main character Kit's head. So everything is told from her perspective. The writing immediately starts off moody, and Kit has a very peculiar kind of way of speaking and thinking. Her thoughts go in these meandering sentences that run off into long similes and metaphors. And for a little while, it is interesting as you're getting to know her, but throughout the book, it can really slow down the momentum, whereas finally, when the book is actually catching momentum. And another thing that seems to be done on purpose is that it's deliberately difficult to gauge Kit's age and mental status from her actions and her thoughts. So she is supposed to be 27 or 28 from her own telling, but the way that she speaks and thinks doesn't always line up with that. It is actually quite inconsistent throughout the book. So she's up and down a lot, and you're not able to guess really why she is acting this way. So, okay, on the very first page, she says, "Besides, I'm busy being baby. Sometimes it's Creven who needs comforting, but for now it's my turn, and I want to savor every moment, every second of ceded control, of not having to think or decide what to do next, where to go, how to behave." So this one I thought shows quite a lot of maturity, because maturity will give you the understanding that giving up control sometimes is like a freeing experience, as she says, right? Yes. Also, we see Creven has his own contemptible part to play in this, for it was him who came to the island in the first place, and it was him who started it, telling me his own precious name and then asking for mine in exchange, as though that was fair, as though it was right to weigh the scales like that, to make himself vulnerable as a means of insisting that I make myself vulnerable too. This is when she's talking about the fact that Kit is not her real name, and she gave Creven the first thought that came to her head as her name. She regards giving her name to him as something vulnerable and something kind of revealing about herself, and that again I thought was a mature look at things, whereas somebody who's younger would not really think about their name as something that could have these kind of connotations, right? Then Another clue that we get in the very first chapter is that Krevin actually crossed the causeway that connects this island to the mainland to get to Kit because he saw her from the mainland and she was living alone on the island, right? So now we have the two of them living on this island together. Next is the matter of how she addresses him. So throughout the book, she calls him Krevin, she calls him Daddy, Daddy Bear, and also Baby in different places. So as a 27-year-old grown woman, I can only assume from this that there is some kind of romantic angle to their relationship, right? But we can also see that all the physical affection always comes from Kit's side. So the most that Krevin will do is like hold her or he cooks for her. But for example, there's one point at which Kit is said to be like kissing his scars, and what he does in return is like massage her scalp and then give her a hug. So it's not that he's not affectionate, but he doesn't seem to be affectionate in the same kind of way towards her. But then also in the book, sprinkled in throughout some places, is Kit asking Krevin to play with her, right? And there is one point. She says, "Play with me." Krevin indulges on automatic, setting his teacup on the floor and taking my heel in his hand. Then he begins pinching my big toe between his index finger and thumb. "This little piggy went to the market," he says, making my toe wiggle back and forth, just like he's supposed to. "And after the littlest piggy goes wee 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 all the way home, I too put down my cup and we play round and round the garden, patty cake, and peas porridge hot." So this one, and then there's one point at which she tries to get him to play along with something in which he's the big bad wolf come to eat her. So these are like definitely very childish thoughts, and she says that this makes her feel like they're back to normal. So there is this deliberate like gap left in our understanding of what is going on between them, and it becomes kind of, you can see why when they reveal it, but throughout the book it makes for some really cringeworthy dialogues and dynamics of the relationship, because she very often says, "Yes sir, whatever you say sir," or "Yes daddy," "Yes Krevin, whatever you say Krevin," like that. And these orange marks are all the places in the book where she has like nicknames for Krevin, or she will say something that seems kind of romantic, and is like all the places where she says daddy or daddy bear or baby are marked with orange. So there's so many of them. Now let's talk about the lore. So firstly, at a landfill, there was a bacteria that managed to mutate into having the ability to digest plastic as though it were biodegradable. So a bacteria that can eat like PET plastic as though it were like kitchen waste. And this was brought the world's attention, right? And scientists were able to isolate it and engineer it to make it hungrier, as Kit says, and they were able to bring down the time taken for the plastic to be broken down by a lot. So 6 weeks became 6 hours. Basically, this bacteria was able to break down plastic at a great speed.
Hi, so I didn't do a very good job of explaining the rest of the backstory in my recording. Alright, I'll just do it now. For a while, everything is good and the plastic eating bacteria are a great solution to the world's pollution problem. But then they manage to break containment from landfills and contaminate the entire world's plastic, including critical infrastructure in like hospitals and water supplies. And then these new bacteria manage to adapt even further and they become capable of infecting humans. Somehow, we don't really know how, and it's never really explained to us. Completely separately, some of the bacteria that already do cause infection in humans become antibiotic resistant. The combined effect of these two things is that hospitals become useless because the risk of infection is just too great. In this world, the doctors and healthcare workers went rogue. They went from trying to save people to hunting for people who were infected to quote unquote save others. They are called backbiters, and Krevin has had many run ins with them. As his story goes, They catch him in a swamp and draw his blood to run a test. But the test comes out negative, so his life is spared, and instead they inject him with what Kit describes as a prophylactic and they let him go.
There is seems to be some sort of medicine that they are giving Kevin when they realize that he is not infected or doesn't have the particular infection that they are looking for, right? We can only assume that this is some kind of vaccination, right? Some kind of vaccine, because it cannot be antibiotic, because antibiotics don't work in this world. And if there really is a vaccination, why is there so much widespread chaos in the world? And why are the backbiters acting in such a lawless manner, which is like catching and killing people, versus just administering the vaccine in a much more calm and like orderly way? Why is it this way if there is something that can help? There is something that you can inject which can help. So we are presented backbiters as these unruly, bad elements of society that are cruelly targeting people, and they have this, like, they are like plague doctors, they are indiscriminate, they have this rusty and old worn out equipment, such that oftentimes they end up infecting people who don't even have an infection to begin with. So this is the bad guys that we are supposed to be afraid of, right? But it is not 100% clear what is this thing that they are injecting. There is a woman that is unconscious, washes ashore on the island, their island, and Kit and Kraven spot the woman, right? Kraven wants to take her back into the bunker and like nurse her back to health, but Kit is like very suspicious from the beginning. She kind of wants to let the woman drown, and she keeps wishing that she never came. But they drag her back, and she's unconscious for the entire, she's not gaining consciousness, right? They change her clothes, and they are like uneasily waiting for her to gain consciousness back. That's when Kit brings up the fact that if she doesn't gain consciousness, she will die of dehydration, right? So Kevin manages, he's able to dig out some IV bags from their supplies, and they set up an IV drip for her. But as soon as she's about to wake up, Kit actually decides that this is asking too much from her. Kevin is asking too much from her to let this woman into their home when they don't know her motives, they don't know what she might do. So she decides that the woman must die by herself, so that Kevin is kind of absolved of the responsibility that he tried his best but it didn't work out. She makes up her mind that she's going to infect this woman, right? And how she does that is through the woman's little hair tie. She dirties this hair tie with like bandages from her own scratches from the toilet. So this hair tie is like nasty, it definitely has an infection on it. She is the one to change the IV bag, and so the needle that goes from the bag into the tube, she infects that needle with the dirty elastic hairband, and she manages to give this woman an infection. And she thinks that Kraven didn't notice because he didn't notice the hair tie in the first place. And then she very cleverly like runs away after she does this and pretends to have a panic attack. In that time, she like tosses the hairband away, and she thinks she's gotten away with it. Eventually the woman dies from that infection, and they're not able to do anything because they don't have antibiotics, and antibiotics don't work anyway. They take this woman to some other part of the island and they bury her there. And on the way back, he falls and he gets a big like wound on one of his legs, and they get back and they clean up the wound as much as possible, but Kevin's wound gets infected, and slowly the infection grows worse and worse, right? Until it reaches a point where Kevin gets a really bad fever and he's getting delirious, and Kit is doing everything in her power that she can to save him, but it has finally reached out of her hands completely. They have this conversation about her calling the backbiters. So it seems that he is in contact with the backbiters, and he wants to ask them for help because they are doctors after all. But Kit obviously doesn't trust them and doesn't want to call them. But at the last moment, she finally does. She recognizes the voice on the other side, and she tells them that they must come to help Kevin. And then the voice on the other end asks her if she is okay. And the call is cut after that, right? this is actually the moment of our big reveal. So after this happens, Kit doesn't go back to the surface where she had left Krevin, and apparently they send a helicopter and the people on the other side of the phone, and they rescue Krevin away from the island, and Kit stays down in her bunker. She's just lying on that couch and she's having this intense psychological trauma, and she's like reliving all the bad memories that she had tried to suppress, because this is all happening around her. And this is when we get our reveal. Is the next day, so let's finish this up. Kit's real story is that her parents were the original backbiters, and what that means is actually they were the doctors who came up with the cure for antibiotic resistance by finding viruses which can attack and destroy the resistant bacteria, right? So then how come Kit is on this island? And who is Krevin and why is he living with her? And how come she's not with her parents? So I'm so glad you asked. And the answer to that is that when they came up with the cure for the antibacterial resistance, there was a fringe group that didn't agree with them. They were sort of like the anti-vaxxers of this universe, and they believed that it is obviously wrong and stupid to inject yourself with viruses. So they started to harass Kit's family. First it was verbal, but slowly they ramped it up and they sent a t-shirt laced with acid to the house, which burnt Kit when she touched it or put it on. Because of this harassment, the family, the parents, decided to buy this island and move the entire family there for their safety. It's obviously really weird that the people that basically came up with the cure that saved, stopped the entire world from collapse, was not even given like government protection, and they had to spend their own personal money to buy an island somewhere and then move their family there. But okay, we don't get an explanation for that. So they move their entire family to this island, and what happens is that one fine day they are like feeling very cooped up on this island, and apparently they leave only Kit behind. So we learn that she had 3 other siblings, which is why there were 4 bunks in the bunker. Parents went to the mainland, and in some random act of violence, like the anti-vax group found them and basically murdered them all. So they ended up inadvertently abandoning Kit on this island by herself. Her parents did have a foundation, and those employees are the ones who look after her after their death. But because she is so traumatized by what has happened, she doesn't want to leave the island, and instead they arrange for a minder to come live with her, who is Krevin, and we learn that he is an ex-convict. So the reason why she has created this entire story about the backbiters is to give her frazzled brain some solace. So the reason why she thinks of the backbiters is as bad or evil is so that she can tell herself that they actually were evil and that they deserve the fate that they get, instead of just being targeted by people who disagreed. She comes up with the plastifhages. So the plastifhages explain the nylon shirt that was sent to her house and that injured her. Instead of it being malicious like attempt on her life, it was just plastifhages, right? She creates this dream world and lives in it so that she doesn't have to face the reality that just one fateful day, one mindless act of violence took her entire family away from her, and her siblings are described as not having survived. So we just have to assume that they must have accompanied the parents on that one day. Because of this reality, she has created this dream world or this narrative to help her cope with it. And we learn a few things before the book closes, right? Some facts. So the first one we learn is that Krevin knew what she did to the woman who had washed ashore. He noticed the wristband and he knew. The second thing we learn is that the woman who had washed ashore was most likely part of that same group of anti-vaxxers or the people who hated Kit's family, and had probably gone there to finish the job, so to speak. Kit finally, when she gets out of her depression, she still refuses to leave the island, so a new minder is appointed for her. And when she sees the new person coming to the shore of the island, she starts to make a new story up for him in her head. So we see that her mental state has not really improved. She is back to the same place of using these stories to help herself feel better. So she's back to where we started. So that's how the book ends. We really have learned a lot about who Kit is and why she behaves the way that she does. Creven is much harder to read. He doesn't reveal anything much to Kit, and so in turn doesn't reveal anything much to us. There is definitely allusion made to his past criminal record, and he also tells a story about how he had to kill somebody or some people in self-defense because they attacked him, but we don't know if this story is true. He does seem to want to take care of Kit, and he multiple times throughout the book tells her that he is never going to hurt her and he is always going to be there for her. And he also grows fruit trees and picks the fruit so that Kit can have food to eat, and he cooks meals for her. We know that he has a few gray hairs, but we don't know exactly how old he is. In general, he's nice to her, but when he's teaching her self-defense, his tone takes a sharp turn. He suddenly becomes quite unforgiving and patronizing, and ends up hurting her more than he had intended to. But in the end, he does seem to snap out of it and realize that he went too far, so he does tend to her wounds and apologize. So it just seems that he is somebody who has some demons of his own in the past, but he is just trying to do this job as well as he can. The book is a character study of Kit, who is somebody who went through this awful tragedy when she was quite young, and then she is left all alone to pick up the pieces of her life, and somebody who builds up this elaborate narrative in her head to try and cope with her reality. She is obviously mentally quite unwell, and she does have the employees of her parents' company to look after her financially and to care about her well-being, but at the end of the day, they are not friends and family. She does not have any friends or family to push her to get better, to make her confront the reality of what has happened to her parents and try to rebuild her life from there. So instead, she sinks deeper into the make-believe world that she has created and lives in it and tries to protect it no matter what. And I thought Creven was a very interesting character as well. I thought he was sort of like a uncomfortable bystander to what was happening. He clearly wanted to do right by Kit, and he played along with her narratives even though he couldn't make up very good stories because he wanted to protect her mental state. It is definitely interesting because this book is from the perspective of somebody who paid the price for progress. In a way, Kit is just collateral in the story of the fight against antibacterial resistance in this universe. She is a character who had to bear the very real burden of the progress that her parents tried to make, and she had to bear the burden of how certain people outside of her control perceived her. And actually, such a character would usually be a supporting character in the story of somebody who has had a more instrumental role in fighting the main evil, which in this case was antibacterial resistance. As for the twist, I really should have seen it coming, because what do you mean there is a causeway to this island that is visible during every single low tide, and nobody has ever thought of coming to this island to live by themselves in a world that is supposedly plagued by plastifrages and antibacterial resistance, to come to an island where you could potentially be isolated from everyone, which would be the perfect quarantine. I was definitely feeling the inconsistencies in Kit's narrative and moods, and there was definitely something weird going on, but I was always so interested to see what was coming next that I didn't really see that Kit was being extremely unreliable in her narration. I got kind of cloak and dagger, a little bait and switch, thinking that it was a dystopian novel, but it turned out to be literary, and that is something that is obviously completely avoidable if you read even one review online or a summary. But I tend to like to go into books completely blind, and I don't like other people's opinions coloring my own as I read, so that's why I didn't know at all where this was gonna go. I couldn't clock the twist, I didn't see it coming, so I guess good job on that. My take on this book as a literary novel is that usually literary novels have a character or characters or relationship which has certain gray area that is open to interpretation and different points of view, which are all valid, right? For example, in Normal People by Sally Rooney, without giving any spoilers, some people might think that the relationship was meaningful, while others can make a case that the relationship was meaningless. And I think both cases can be made. In this book, however, I felt it was pretty obvious that what happened to Kit was wrong, and it was very unfair that she had to grapple with it in such a dysfunctional kind of way using this narrative. So there was not really any much room for interpretation in that for me, whereas I thought that Creven's character was a lot more interesting and it had a lot more opportunity for discussion. We could read about things like why did he accept this job? Does he think of Kit as an equal, or does he pity her? Does he care for her in the way that she cares for him, or is it just a job? Why does he go along with her narrative in the first place? Does he feel like telling her the truth sometimes or not playing along? But we don't get to read about any of these things, and I think the main reason for that is to maintain the twist at the end. I understand why, but my take is that the twist gives an illusion that there is a plot in this book, whereas it's only an illusion. The book still doesn't have that much of a plot, because the woman who is the antagonist, the woman who watches the show, never wakes up, she never gains consciousness, so she's never a real player in the story. And because of that, there was opportunity to actually just lean completely into the plotlessness of literary novels, and in that way we might have been able to read a more interesting character, which was Creven, which could also be a vehicle for other kinds of discussion to happen, like should you force somebody who is having a really hard time but she refuses to get better, should you force her? Should you, for her own good, or is it okay to play along with how her mental state is? So I thought that was a more interesting question than keeping us in the dark for something that had it was not a very great payoff for me. And so in the end, as a literary novel, it felt a little undercooked because of that. And as a dystopian novel, it also felt undercooked because all the real action of the dystopian plot points, which is like the antibacterial resistance, all happens off screen, off the page. So we only hear about it, it never happens in the canon of the book, and that is also kind of disappointing. And of course, it's not about the dystopian world, because it turns out to be completely not true, which is also disappointing. So overall, I gave this book 2.5 stars, rounded up to 3 on Goodreads, and I am actually excited to see more novels from this author going forward. And actually, I'm very interested to now read a real dystopian novel about antibacterial resistance, and I hope I can find that. That's all.